depths of human existence, where shadows dance with light and pain, intertwines with hope, lies one of life's most profound truths. Suffering, rather than being merely an obstacle to overcome, can become the very crucible through which we forge meaning and discover our deepest purpose. This paradox has puzzled philosophers, theologians, and thinkers throughout history, yet it remains as relevant today as it was in ancient times, when Epictetus taught that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond. The Austrian neurologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl understood this principle in ways that few humans ever will. Having witnessed the absolute worst of human cruelty and having lost everything that most people consider essential to a meaningful life, Frankl discovered something extraordinary. Even in the most devastating circumstances, when all external freedoms are stripped away, we retain the ultimate human freedom, the ability to choose our attitude toward our circumstances. This realization became the foundation of logotherapy, his revolutionary approach to psychotherapy, which posits that the primary human drive is not pleasure or power, but the search for meaning. When we examine our lives honestly, we often find ourselves trapped in what existentialist philosophers call thrownness, the condition of being thrown into existence without our consent, into circumstances we did not choose. We find ourselves in specific families, cultures, historical moments, and physical bodies, all beyond our initial control. Yet within this apparent limitation lies our greatest opportunity for growth and self-discovery. The very constraints that seem to limit us can become the raw material from which we sculpt our character and purpose. The ancient Stoics understood this principle deeply. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his Meditations while leading the Roman Empire, reflected on how obstacles become the path itself. He recognized that external events are neutral. They become positive or negative only through our interpretation and response. This perspective transforms suffering from a meaningless burden into a meaningful teacher, from an enemy to be defeated into a guide toward wisdom and strength. Buddhism offers another profound lens through which to understand suffering's role in human development. The first noble truth acknowledges that suffering is an inherent part of existence, but this acknowledgement is not pessimistic resignation. Rather, it is the first step toward liberation. By fully accepting the reality of suffering, we stop wasting energy on futile attempts to avoid the unavoidable and can instead focus on understanding its nature and finding freedom within it. The Buddha's insight that attachment is the root of suffering points toward a fundamental truth about human psychology. We suffer not primarily because of what happens to us, but because of our resistance to what happens to us. When we cling desperately to how we think things should be, we create additional layers of anguish beyond the initial difficulty. Learning to hold our preferences lightly while still caring deeply about our values represents one of the most sophisticated forms of emotional intelligence we can develop. Friedrich Nietzsche, despite his reputation for darkness, offered one of history's most empowering perspectives on suffering through his concept of amor fati, love of fate. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of whatever happens, but rather embracing our entire life story, including its most difficult chapters, as necessary components of who we become. Nietzsche suggested that we should live as if we would willingly repeat our exact life, with all its joys and sorrows, infinitely. This radical acceptance transforms suffering from something that happens to us into something we can claim as our own. Carl Jung expanded on this theme through his understanding of individuation, the process by which we become whole, integrated human beings. Jung recognized that our greatest wounds often point toward our greatest gifts, that what we most resist in ourselves frequently contains the seeds of our most significant contributions to the world. The concept of the wounded healer suggests that those who have experienced deep pain and found ways to transform it often become the most effective helpers of others facing similar struggles. Modern psychology has validated many of these ancient insights through research on post-traumatic growth. Scientists have documented that many people who face severe challenges not only recover, but actually develop greater resilience, deeper relationships, enhanced appreciation for life, and stronger spiritual connections than they had before their difficulties. This research confirms what wisdom traditions have long taught, that adversity, while never welcome, can catalyze profound positive transformation when approached with the right mindset and support. The key to transforming suffering into meaning lies in developing what we might call existential courage, the willingness to face life's inherent difficulties without losing hope or abandoning our values. This courage is not the absence of fear or pain, but the commitment to continue growing and contributing despite these inevitable human experiences. It requires us to develop a relationship with uncertainty, to find stability not in external circumstances, but in our own capacity to adapt and find purpose regardless of what life presents. Viktor Frankl observed that those who survived the concentration camps were not necessarily the physically strongest, but those who maintained a sense of meaning and purpose. They had something to live for that transcended their immediate circumstances, whether it was reuniting with loved ones, completing important work, or simply witnessing to the possibility of human dignity under the worst conditions. This why became their source of strength when the how of survival seemed impossible. The search for meaning is deeply personal, yet it often leads us toward universal themes. We find meaning through creativity and contribution, through love and relationships, and through our attitude toward unavoidable suffering. These three sources of meaning, what we give to the world, what we take from it, and how we face what we cannot change, provide a framework for living that remains relevant regardless of our specific circumstances. When we shift our focus from "why is this happening to me" to "what can I learn from this" and "how can I grow through this experience," we begin to reclaim our power. This shift doesn't minimize the reality of pain or suggest that all suffering serves a purpose, but it recognizes our capacity to create purpose from even the most senseless experiences. We become authors of our own meaning, even when we cannot control the plot of our lives. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote about the hedonic treadmill long before psychologists gave it that name. The tendency for humans to quickly return to a baseline level of happiness despite positive or negative events. This observation might initially seem discouraging, but it actually points toward a liberating truth. Since external circumstances have limited power to provide lasting satisfaction, we must look elsewhere for genuine fulfillment. This elsewhere is often found in the cultivation of wisdom, compassion, and service to something greater than ourselves. The concept of meaning-making has become central to modern therapeutic approaches. When people can construct coherent narratives about their experiences, finding connections between their struggles and their values, they demonstrate remarkable resilience. This narrative capacity, our ability to tell stories about our lives that honor both the difficulty of our experiences and our growth through them, represents one of humanity's most powerful adaptive mechanisms. Yet meaning-making is not simply about positive thinking or reframing negative experiences in artificially optimistic ways. Authentic meaning-making requires us to hold the full complexity of our experiences, acknowledging both the genuine losses and the unexpected gifts that emerge from our struggles. It asks us to develop what the poet John Keats called negative capability, the ability to remain in uncertainty and doubt without irritably reaching after fact and reason. The Japanese concept of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things, offers another perspective on finding meaning in difficulty. This aesthetic philosophy recognizes that the temporary nature of life, rather than making it meaningless, actually makes each moment more precious. Our awareness of loss and change, instead of being purely painful, can deepen our appreciation for what we have while we have it. In our contemporary world, where we often feel entitled to happiness and comfort, rediscovering the transformative power of difficulty becomes especially important. We live in cultures that frequently promise to eliminate suffering rather than help us find meaning within it. This approach, while well-intentioned, can leave us unprepared for life's inevitable challenges and can make us feel like failures when we encounter normal human difficulties. The practice of contemplating our mortality, known as memento mori in the classical tradition, serves not to depress us, but to clarify our priorities. When we truly internalize that our time is limited, we naturally focus on what matters most. Many people report that facing their own mortality or that of loved ones, while initially devastating, ultimately led them to live more authentically and purposefully. The transition from seeking a life free from problems to seeking a life rich with meaning represents a fundamental shift in consciousness. Instead of asking, "How can I be happy?" we begin asking, "How can I be useful?" Instead of, "How can I avoid pain?" we wonder, "How can I grow from whatever I experience?" These questions orient us toward resilience and contribution rather than mere comfort and consumption. Community and connection play crucial roles in this transformation process. While the search for meaning is ultimately personal, it rarely happens in isolation. We need witnesses to our struggles, companions for our journey, and opportunities to serve others facing similar challenges. The support of others who have walked similar paths provides both practical guidance and emotional sustenance during our darkest moments. The relationship between suffering and compassion deserves special attention. Those who have experienced significant difficulties often develop enhanced empathy for others in pain. This increased compassion can become a bridge from personal suffering to meaningful service. When our pain becomes a source of understanding and help for others, it transforms from a purely private burden into a contribution to the greater good. However, it's important to recognize that not everyone who suffers becomes more compassionate. Some people become bitter, closed, or self-protective. The difference often lies in whether they can maintain connection with others and whether they can find ways to use their experience in service of something larger than themselves. This is why community support and opportunities for meaningful contribution are so vital to the healing process. The cultivation of wisdom through suffering is an ancient human theme, appearing in traditions from Job's trials in Hebrew scripture to the Buddha's enlightenment after encountering aging, sickness, and death. These stories suggest that encountering life's fundamental difficulties is not an unfortunate accident, but an essential part of human development. They remind us that the goal is not to emerge from difficulties unchanged, but to be transformed by them in ways that increase our capacity for wisdom, love, and service. As we navigate our own inevitable encounters with loss, disappointment, and pain, we have the opportunity to join this ancient conversation about meaning and transformation. We can choose to see ourselves not as victims of circumstance, but as participants in the great human project of creating meaning from whatever life presents. This choice, made and remade countless times throughout our lives, represents perhaps the most important freedom we possess. The path from suffering to meaning is not linear or predictable. It requires patience with ourselves as we gradually learn to hold both grief and gratitude, both loss and hope. It asks us to develop what might be called spiritual stamina, the ability to keep choosing growth and connection even when we feel exhausted by life's demands. Most importantly, it invites us to trust in our own capacity for transformation, even when we cannot yet see how our current struggles might serve any useful purpose. In the end, the meaning we find in suffering is not something that exists independently of our efforts to create it. We are not archaeologists uncovering pre-existing significance, but artists painting meaning onto the canvas of our experience. This creative act, performed by conscious human beings choosing to find purpose in their pain, represents one of our species' most remarkable achievements. Through it, we transform not only ourselves, but also contribute to the great human story of resilience, wisdom, and hope.